The German patrol thought the farm was empty, just another quiet stretch of countryside swallowed by war, with frost on the fields and smoke drifting low over broken fences as boots crunched toward the barn. They moved fast and loose, laughing softly, rifles slung, because nothing ever happened out here. Then the lead soldier screamed, his leg yanked sideways as if the ground itself had come alive. Everything stopped. It was early autumn in occupied Europe, the kind of cold morning where breath hangs in the air and every sound carries too far. And 19 German soldiers were walking straight into a trap built by a farm boy who'd never fired a shot in anger. He was 19 years old, thin from years of hard work, raised on fields, animals, and tools, not guns or drills or shouted orders. The war had rolled over his village like a storm, taking food, taking men, taking hope, and now German patrols moved through his family's land whenever they wanted, because they could. Quick thing before we continue. Hit subscribe if you want more incredible WW2 stories like this, because we tell the most unbelievable true moments every single week. And this one only gets crazier from here. What those soldiers didn't know was that the boy had spent his whole life solving problems with whatever he had around him. Fixing broken carts, building fences, and turning scraps into tools, because that's what poor farm families did to survive. And when the Germans started searching barns, stealing crops, and dragging neighbors away, he didn't think like a soldier. He thought like a farmer. That made all the difference. The idea started simple, almost stupid, the kind of thought that pops up when you're angry and scared and tired of feeling powerless. He noticed how patrols always followed the same path across the field, stepping over a shallow ditch without looking because they'd done it 100 times before. He noticed how rain softened the soil there, and how his pitchfork sank deep with almost no effort. And slowly, quietly, an idea took shape. He worked at night, when the moon was thin and clouds hid what little light there was, digging narrow pits just deep enough to twist an ankle or trap a leg. He sharpened old pitchfork tines and wooden stakes, not to kill, but to stop, because dead soldiers brought searches and fire and revenge. He wanted confusion. He wanted fear. Most of all, he wanted time. He covered the pits carefully, laying sticks and straw, then brushing dirt over the top until the ground looked untouched. Just another uneven farm path. Then he set trip lines using wire pulled from broken fences, tying them low and tight so a boot would catch without being seen. The pitchforks went last, buried upright at angles that would hook clothing and packs when someone stumbled. It wasn't a weapon. It was a snare. The patrol arrived just after dawn, tired and careless, talking about food and warmth and how quiet the countryside had become, because resistance here was supposed to be weak. The first man fell hard, screaming as his leg twisted and dropped into the pit. And before anyone could react, another tripped, then another, shouts piling on top of each other as balance disappeared and rifles clattered into the dirt. Panic spread fast. Orders shouted in German overlapped and contradicted, because nobody could see what was happening, only hear men falling and yelling and begging for help. Some tried to rush forward, others backed up, and that made it worse, because the traps weren't in one place. They were everywhere. From the barn loft, the farm boy watched with his heart pounding so hard he thought it might give him away, gripping an old hunting rifle he barely knew how to use, knowing he didn't want to fire unless he had to. He shouted instead, his voice cracking but loud, telling them to drop their weapons or the next step would be their last. They froze. Silence hit like a wall. The Germans had numbers, training, and guns, but none of that mattered when every step might break a leg or drag you to the ground. They couldn't rush him. They couldn't see him clearly. And they couldn't leave without carrying their wounded through the same field of hidden traps. One officer tried to stand tall, shouting back threats, but his men were bleeding, crying, stuck, and terrified of the earth under their own boots. Another soldier fired wildly toward the barn, the shot echoing uselessly, and the boy answered by firing once into the dirt near a trapped man's head, close enough to make the point without killing anyone. That changed everything. Slowly, carefully, hands went up. Rifles dropped. Helmets hit the ground. One by one, 19 German soldiers surrendered to a teenager with a farm tool trap and more nerve than he knew he had. He kept them there for hours, afraid to move, afraid reinforcements would arrive, afraid he'd wake up from what felt like a dream. Eventually, local resistance fighters arrived, alerted by the noise and disbelief spreading through nearby villages. And when they saw the scene, they laughed, then stared, then laughed again, because it made no sense. 19 armed soldiers. One farm boy. No shots fired in the fight itself. Just traps, timing, and terror. Word spread fast, because stories like this always do, whispered from house to house, growing with every telling, turning fear into something dangerous for occupiers. German patrols started avoiding farms, then fields, then entire areas, sticking to roads and moving slower, because the ground itself no longer felt safe. For the boy, nothing felt heroic. His hands shook for days. He barely slept. He kept seeing their faces, the fear in their eyes, the moment power shifted, and he wondered how close he'd come to dying. But he also saw something else, something he'd never felt before. Control. The captured soldiers were sent away, and the farm returned to silence, but it wasn't the same silence as before. It wasn't empty. It was watchful. And in that quiet, people realized something important, something armies hated. You didn't need tanks or planes to fight back. Sometimes you just needed to understand the land better than the people marching across it. Years later, historians would talk about resistance movements, sabotage, and armed fighters. But stories like this rarely made it into books because they didn't fit clean rules of war. There was no battle line, no grand strategy, just a boy, a field, and a refusal to stay powerless. The German army lost millions of soldiers during the war, but losses like this cut deeper than numbers, because they attacked confidence. Every patrol that hesitated, every boot that stepped lighter, every order delayed by fear, all of it mattered. Occupation worked only when people believed resistance was useless. This proved it wasn't. The farm boy survived the war. He went back to farming, back to quiet work and early mornings, and for years he didn't talk about what he'd done, because to him it wasn't a story. It was a moment where he'd had no other choice. But the land remembered, and so did the people. That field never looked the same again, not because of scars in the dirt, but because everyone who walked it knew what had happened there, knew that even in the darkest years, with nothing but tools and courage, one person could stop an army, at least for a moment. Thanks for watching this story about an ordinary farm boy who turned simple tools into something unstoppable. Next week, we're covering another unbelievable moment where creativity beats firepower. So make sure you're subscribed and we'll see you there.